The sun had just begun to set, casting a golden glow over the alien city. The spires of the tall buildings stood proud, reaching for the sky as if they were trying to touch the very stars themselves. The air was thick with anticipation, and the streets were filled with an eerie silence. Today was the day that the princess, Sira, would be offered as a sacrifice to the gods. Sira stood in the center of the square, her wrists bound by heavy chains. The cold metal bit into her skin, and her arms ached from the weight of the shackles. Her head hung low, and her once beautiful face was bruised and covered in dirt from the harsh treatment she had endured. The people gathered around her, their faces a mixture of excitement and curiosity. Some whispered to each other, eager for the ritual to begin. Others simply stared, knowing this was a momentous occasion for their society. A princess, the last of her bloodline, condemned to die to please their gods. It was an ancient tradition, one that had been followed for thousands of years. Sira had always known this day would come. She had been taught from a young age that her fate was sealed. As the royal family's only heir, her death would ensure peace and prosperity for her people. Her bloodline was the last link to their ancient past, and her sacrifice would be the ultimate offering to their gods. But as she stood there, bound and alone, she felt no honor, no pride, only a deep, aching sorrow for the life she would never live. The high priests, dressed in ceremonial robes, stood before her, chanting ancient words in a language that Sira had never truly understood. Their voices were low and rhythmic, the sound filling the air like a heavy drumbeat. The people began to join in, raising their voices in unison, their chants growing louder and louder as they prepared for the ritual. Sira felt the cold stone beneath her feet. As she stood on the sacrificial pillar, the place where countless others had met their end before her, the sharp edges of the stone dug into her skin. But she did not flinch. She had resigned herself to this moment long ago. She was nothing more than a symbol, a pawn in a game that had been played for centuries. The first stone hit her chest with a dull thud. It wasn't the worst she had endured, but it was the beginning. The crowd cheered, their bloodlust awakened by the sight of her suffering. The stones came faster now, hitting her body with brutal force. Each blow made her skin sting, each impact sending a wave of pain through her. But she did not cry out. She had been trained to endure. She had been taught to endure for the greater good of her people. As the stones continued to fall, Sira's thoughts began to drift. She thought of her family, of her ancestors, and the sacrifices they had made to keep their people safe. She thought of the world she would never see, the life she would never live. She thought of the people around her, their faces hidden behind masks of ritualistic pride, and wondered if they truly believed in what they were doing, or were they simply following tradition because it was expected. And then she heard it, a voice, strong and loud, cutting through the chaos. Stop. The crowd went silent. Sira's heart skipped a beat. She looked up, her eyes struggling to focus through the blood and pain. She saw him, a human, standing at the edge of the crowd. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Sira felt a glimmer of hope. The human was not tall, nor was he particularly impressive in appearance. He was dressed in simple clothes, his face calm but determined. His eyes, however, were filled with something Sira had never seen in the eyes of her own people: compassion and defiance. His presence was a sharp contrast to the cold, ritualistic atmosphere of the square. "Who dares to interrupt the sacred ceremony?" one of the high priests demanded, his voice filled with anger. He turned toward the human, his face twisted. In disgust, "I do," the human replied firmly, his voice carrying across the square. "I do not care for your gods, your rituals, or your traditions. This is wrong." The crowd stirred in confusion. Many of them had never seen a human before, and they had certainly never seen one challenge their customs so boldly. The high priest sneered at the human, his eyes narrowing. "Do you not understand? She is a princess. Her death is required to bring peace. You cannot stop this," the priest hissed. The human did not flinch. "I don't care who she is. No one deserves this." He stepped forward, walking toward the sacrificial pillar, his gaze never leaving Sira. The high priest shouted, ordering the guards to stop him, but the human moved too quickly. In one fluid motion, he drew a blade from his side and sliced through the chains that held Sira in place. The sound of the metal snapping echoed through the square. Sira gasped as the chains fell to the ground, for the first time in what felt like forever. She was free. She swayed on her feet, too weak to stand on her own. But the human was there, reaching out to steady her. His touch was warm and reassuring, and for a moment, she allowed herself to lean into it. The crowd was in shock. The priests were furious. But the human stood tall, his back straight, and his eyes filled with a quiet determination. He didn't seem afraid. He seemed confident. "Come with me," the human said to Sira, his voice soft but firm. "You don't have to die." Sira looked at him, her heart racing. She didn't know who he was or why he had done this. But in that moment, she didn't care. All that mattered was that he had given her a chance to live out with the human's help. Sira took her first steps toward freedom, leaving behind the cold stone of the sacrificial pillar and the people, who had once viewed her as nothing more than an offering. Together, they ran into the unknown, and for the first time in her life, Sira believed that she could choose her own fate. The air was thick with tension as Elias, the human who had saved her, led Sira through the narrow streets. His grip on her arm was firm but gentle, as if he was determined not to let go. His pace was quick, but not too fast for her to keep up. She had been weak from the beating, her body sore and trembling, but her heart was filled with a strange, newfound hope. Sira had never been outside the city's walls before. Her life had always been confined to the royal palace, to the ancient customs and rituals that governed her people's lives. But now, as she walked beside the human, she felt as though she were seeing the world for the first time. The streets were alive with the sounds of the city vendors shouting their wares, children laughing, and the hum of distant conversations. But it all felt different. It felt real. "You're safe now," Elias said, glancing over at her with a reassuring smile. "I promise I won't let anything happen to you." Sira didn't know why she believed him. She didn't know anything about this human. She had never met one before, never even heard stories of them. Yet, in his eyes, she saw something she had never seen in the eyes of her own people: kindness. He didn't look at her as a symbol or a sacrifice. He looked at her as if she was a person, as if she mattered. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. As she finally spoke, "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Why did you save me?" Elias stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious, because it was wrong. He said simply, "I couldn't just stand there and watch them kill you for no reason. But I was supposed to die." Sira replied, her voice shaky, It's the way of my people. It's our tradition." He shook his head, his eyes full of conviction. "Traditions don't make something right. Just because something has been done for a long time doesn't mean it should continue. You deserve to live, not to die as a sacrifice." Sira was silent. The words he spoke made sense, but they were also terrifying. For her entire life, she had been told that her sacrifice was necessary for the survival of her people. The idea that she could be free from that fate was as foreign to her as the idea of running through the streets with a human. "But I have nowhere to go," she said, her voice barely audible. "What will I do? My people will never accept me now. I'm a traitor." "You're not a traitor," Elias said firmly. "You're someone who refused to let someone else decide your fate. You're stronger than you think." Sira looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of insincerity, but all she saw was honesty. The doubt in her heart slowly began to fade, replaced by a small flicker of trust. She had nothing left, no home, no family, no place in the world. But maybe, just maybe, there was something more for her, something beyond the chains of tradition. "Where are we going?" she asked, finally feeling the strength to speak again. Elias gave her a small smile. "I don't know yet, but I do know that we can't stay here. They'll be looking for us, and we won't be safe in the city for long." He was right. Sira could already hear the distant sounds of alarm bells ringing. The priests, the guards, the city leaders, they would all be after them. She could feel the weight of her past pressing down on her, threatening to drag her back to the sacrificial pillar, to the fate that had been written for her. But Elias's presence beside her gave her strength. For the first time in her life, she felt as if she could fight back. Elias led her down a winding alley, his eyes scanning the streets for any sign of danger. He moved with the practiced ease of someone who had seen conflict before, someone who knew how to survive. Sarah stayed close behind him, trying to blend into the shadows, her heart pounding in her chest. As they turned another corner, they came across a small group of rebels. They were hiding in a narrow street, their faces tense, weapons ready. They eyed Elias and Sarah warily, their fingers resting on the hilts of their blades. "This is her," Elias said quickly, raising his hands to show he wasn't a threat. "The princess. She needs our help." The rebels looked at each other, confused. One of them, a tall woman with dark eyes, stepped forward. "The princess? You're telling us that the princess is alive?" Elias nodded. "I know it sounds crazy, but she's been saved. She wants to join you. She wants to help." Sarah felt their eyes on her, weighing her, judging her. She wasn't sure if they saw her as an ally or an enemy. She had been the symbol of oppression for so long, a figurehead for their rulers' cruel customs. She didn't know if these rebels could accept her as one of their own. But then the woman with dark eyes spoke again, her voice soft but determined. "If she wants to help, she's welcome. We're all in this together now." Sarah felt a strange warmth spread through her chest at her words. The rebels didn't see her as a princess, a symbol, or a sacrifice. They saw her as a person. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt as though she belonged. She wasn't just someone to be used. She wasn't just a part of some tradition. She was her own person, with her own future. As they made their way through the city's underbelly, Elias and Sarah exchanged stories. Elias told her about Earth, about the way humans lived, about their struggles and triumphs. Sarah shared her own story, her life in the palace, the weight of her people's traditions, and the pain of knowing her destiny was already written. Through it all, Sarah realized something. She had never truly been free. But now, with Elias by her side and the rebels offering her a chance to stand on her own, she saw a future that was hers to shape. It wasn't the life she had been born into, but it was a life she could fight for. And for the first time in a long while, Sarah smiled. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she was no longer afraid of what it might bring. The city of Zalar had been buzzing with excitement just hours ago. Now, it was filled with tension. The sounds of distant bells echoed through the streets, signaling that the hunt had begun. Sarah and Elias had only moments to escape before the city's forces closed in on them. The rebels who had offered their help had already gone into hiding, scattered through the winding alleys and secret paths that ran beneath the city. As Elias led Sarah through the narrow streets, he kept his movements swift and purposeful. His eyes scanned the buildings, the corners, the rooftops, everything, all at once. He had been in dangerous situations before, but this one felt different. He wasn't just fighting for his life, he was protecting someone who had been a prisoner of fate for her entire life. Sarah's heart raced in her chest. She had never run from anyone or anything before. She had always been bound by duty, by the expectations placed upon her. But now, as they fled through the streets, something deep inside her stirred. She had never experienced freedom like this, freedom to choose, to decide for herself. Elias had given her that freedom, and now they were running from the very people who would make sure she never had it. As they turned a corner, a loud shout pierced the air. The first of the city guards had spotted them. Without hesitation, Elias pulled Sarah into a nearby alley, pushing her against the wall as they crouched low. The sound of heavy boots echoed on the cobblestone streets, growing louder with each passing second. "They're getting closer," Elias whispered, his voice barely audible. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as she pressed herself against the cold stone. She could feel the weight of the city's gaze on her, even in the darkness. She wasn't just a runaway princess. She was a symbol of defiance, and the rulers of Zalar would stop at nothing to make sure that symbol was erased. We need to keep moving, Elias said, his voice firm. Don't worry. I've been in worse situations. Sarah nodded, though doubt still lingered in her heart. They had only just started this escape, and already the walls were closing in. She didn't know where they were going, or if they would make it out of the city alive. But as she looked into Elias's eyes, she found a strange sense of comfort. She trusted him. She had to. There was no turning back now. Elias led her through a maze of alleys and back streets, staying as quiet as possible. Every turn they took seemed to bring them closer to safety, but also closer to danger. They had to move fast, yet cautiously. It was only a matter of time before the entire city would be searching for them, and when the priests, the soldiers, and the powerful families that governed Zaylor turned their attention to someone. It was nearly impossible to escape. As they reached a small courtyard, Elias suddenly stopped. "There's a way out," he said, his voice low. He pointed to a narrow passageway between two crumbling buildings. The air here was damp, the shadows deep and thick, but we'll need to move quickly. This is the last exit before the city walls. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. The idea of leaving everything behind was overwhelming, but she knew it was the only choice she had. There was no other way forward. Elias was her only chance, and she wasn't about to waste it. They moved quickly, slipping into the passageway. The walls of the alley seemed to close in on them, and the darkness felt suffocating. The only sound was the soft shuffle of their feet and the distant clanging of the guards' armor. As they searched nearby, "We'll make it," Elias whispered, sensing Sarah's growing anxiety. "Just stay close." Sarah nodded, her grip tightening on Elias's sleeve. She had never felt so vulnerable, so exposed. Her entire life had been a carefully planned performance, but now there were no more scripts, no more roles to play. She was just Sarah, a woman trying to survive. The passageway grew narrower as they moved deeper into the shadows. Sarah could feel the dampness in the air, the weight of the city pressing down on them. She was no longer a princess, no longer a symbol. She was just a woman, running from everything she had ever known. The reality of what she was doing, of what Elias had done for her, started to sink in. She was free, but freedom was not easy. It came with a price. "Keep going," Elias urged, his voice steady. "We're almost there." They reached a small door at the end of the alley. Elias quickly checked it for traps, then pushed it open. The smell of fresh air hit them, and for a moment, Sarah allowed herself to believe they might make it out of the city alive. But as they stepped into the open, the sound of voices echoed from behind them. They were too late. The guards had caught up. "Run!" Elias shouted, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her forward. They sprinted across the open space, hearts pounding, feet pounding against the hard ground. The guards shouted orders behind them, but Elias kept pushing forward, never looking back. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps, her legs burning with exhaustion, but she didn't stop. Not now. Not when she was so close to freedom. Just as they neared the edge of the city, a figure appeared in front of them. It was another rebel, a young man with a hood over his head, holding a sword. "Follow me," the rebel called out, motioning for them to run faster. Sarah didn't hesitate. She and Elias followed the rebel as he led them through the last few twists and turns of the city's winding streets. The walls of the city loomed high behind them, but ahead there was nothing but the open fields, a world beyond the walls that had kept her in prison for so long. And then, at last, they were free. The gates of the city were behind them, and they were standing in the wide, open space of the plains. The stars shone brightly above them, and for the first time in her life, Sarah felt as though she could breathe. Elias stopped, looking back at the city. He could see the lights flickering behind the walls, the search parties that would never stop looking for them. But for now, they had escaped. For now, they were safe. "You did it," Sarah said, her voice filled with awe. Elias gave a small smile. "We did it." The first morning after their escape felt different. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting long shadows across the open fields. Elias and Sarah stood at the edge of the camp. Watching the distant city walls fade into the background, it was a strange feeling, standing free after so many years of being trapped by the rules of her people. Sira had been a princess, a symbol of tradition, but now, she was something else, something she hadn't yet fully understood. She was free, yes, but what was she going to do with that freedom? The night had passed quietly. The rebels who had helped them escape had hidden them in a small, secluded camp just beyond the city limits. The camp was made up of a small group of fighters, people who had grown tired of the tyranny of the ruling families and the priests, who held control over the people's lives. They had heard of the princess's sacrifice, and when Elias had brought her to them, they didn't hesitate to offer help. Sira had never seen such people before. These rebels didn't follow the rules of her society. They didn't respect the old ways. They were fighters, survivors, and above all, they were people who had chosen to take control of their own fate. They had no royalty, no gods to serve, and yet they carried a strength that Sira had never known. As they sat by the campfire, Sira spoke with the rebel leader, a woman named Lyra. Lyra was tall, with sharp features and dark eyes that seemed to see through everything. Her voice was calm, but filled with determination as she explained their mission. "We are here to change everything," Lyra said. "The people of Zale are oppressed. They've lived under the thumb of those in power for too long. But the time for change has come. With you, Sira, we can make them see that there's more to life than rituals and sacrifices." Sira listened intently. She didn't fully understand what Lyra meant, but the fire in the woman's eyes was hard to ignore. She had been taught that her life had a purpose, a greater meaning. But now, for the first time, she was hearing someone speak of something else, something that didn't rely on sacrifice and submission. Elias, who had been standing nearby, approached the fire and joined them. He had been silent for most of the morning, his mind clearly occupied with something else. But when he spoke, his voice was filled with a calm conviction. "We can't just let her go back," Elias said, looking at Lyra. "We have to make sure Sira understands what's at stake. She needs to know that this rebellion isn't just about overthrowing the leaders, it's about giving people like her a chance to live without being used." Sira looked at Elias, then at Lyra, unsure of how to feel. Could she really join these rebels? Could she truly stand against the very society that had shaped her entire life? "You were chosen to be a sacrifice," Lyra continued, "but you are more than that. You are the key to breaking the chains that have kept your people enslaved. The people look to you whether they realize it or not. If you stand with us, you can lead them toward a future where they are free." Sira thought about her life. The cold stone of the sacrificial pillar, the pain of being chosen for something she never asked for. Was this the chance she had been waiting for? Was she ready to leave behind everything she had known? She wasn't sure, but deep down, she felt something stir inside her. A desire, a need to be more than just a symbol. "What do we do now?" Sira asked, her voice soft but determined. Lyra smiled. "Now, we prepare. We need to gather support. We need to show the people that they don't have to live in fear. We'll start by taking back the outer villages, the ones that are too far for the city's forces to protect. If we can bring them to our side, we can weaken the power of the ruling families." Sira nodded, feeling a sense of resolve settle in her chest. For the first time in her life, she was making a choice, a real choice. She wasn't going to be sacrificed. She wasn't going to be used. She was going to fight. The day passed quickly. Sira joined the rebels as they planned their first move. They moved through the woods, gathering supplies and speaking with villagers who had been oppressed by the ruling families. The further they went, the more Sira began to understand what Lyra meant. The people weren't just afraid of the rulers, they were also tired. Tired of living in fear. Tired of being forced to follow traditions that didn't make sense to them anymore. As night fell, Sira stood by the fire with Elias, the two of them sharing a quiet moment. She could see the stars above, their light a reminder of the vastness of the world. It felt different now, like she had a place in it, like she could make a difference. Elias spoke first, breaking the silence. "You're stronger than you think." Sira looked at him, her eyes searching his face. I don't feel strong. You are, Elias said, his voice gentle. You've been through more than most people can imagine, and you're still standing. You've got a chance to change things. You don't have to be a prisoner anymore. Sira smiled softly, feeling a sense of gratitude for this human who had saved her life. He had shown her a different way, a way that was full of possibilities. It was a way that didn't require her to sacrifice herself for others. It was a way where she could fight for herself and for those who needed it most. The next morning, the rebellion set out for the outer villages. Sira walked beside Elias, feeling the weight of her past slowly lifting from her shoulders. She was no longer just a princess, bound by tradition. She was someone who could make her own choices, someone who could change the future. As they approached the first village, Sira could see the fear in the people's eyes, but there was also hope. They had heard the whispers of the rebellion. They had heard that the princess had survived and was leading a fight against the rulers. Sira took a deep breath and stepped forward. She wasn't just a symbol anymore. She was a leader, and with Elias at her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. The first village they reached was small but full of life. The buildings were simple, made of wood and stone, and the streets were narrow but clean. As Sira and the rebels approached, she could see the people watching them from their doorways and windows. There was fear in their eyes, but there was something else to hope. Hope that things could change. Sira didn't know what to expect when they arrived. She had spent her entire life within the walls of the palace, learning the ways of her people, following their traditions. But now, here she was, standing on the edge of a revolution. The villagers didn't see her as a princess. They didn't see her as a symbol of sacrifice. They saw her as someone who had defied fate and was ready to fight for a better future. Lyra, the rebel leader, stood beside her, surveying the scene. "This is it," Lyra said. "If we can win over this village, we'll have a strong foothold. We'll show them that the old ways don't have to control their lives." Sira took a deep breath. She had never thought of herself as a leader, but she knew what was at stake. She had to do this. For the people, for her future. She walked toward the center of the village, with Elias right behind her. The villagers were hesitant at first, unsure of what to make of the rebels and the princess who had broken free. But as Sira spoke, something changed. She told them about the life she had once known, the life of a princess bound by tradition, and how she had escaped. She spoke of the rebellion and the chance for them to rise up against the rulers, who had kept them in chains for so long. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of her experience. "We have the power to change things," Sira said, her voice strong and clear. "We don't have to live in fear anymore. We don't have to sacrifice our future for the sake of an old tradition that has kept us all in chains." At first, there was silence. The villagers exchanged looks, unsure of what to believe. But slowly, one by one, they stepped forward. Some were older, their faces lined with years of hardship, but their eyes held the same hope that Sira had seen. In the rebel fighters, some were younger, filled with the energy and passion of those who had never known a world without the weight of tradition. "We'll stand with you," one man said, his voice steady. "If you can fight for us, we will fight for you." The crowd began to cheer. It was the first real sign of support they had received, and it was enough to fuel their determination. The rebels, along with Sira, spent the rest of the day rallying the villagers, gathering supplies, and preparing for what lay ahead. It wasn't going to be easy. The rulers of Zalar had a powerful army, and they wouldn't let a rebellion go unnoticed. That night, as the campfire burned low and the stars filled the sky, Elias pulled Sira aside. He had been quiet for most of the day, his thoughts clearly focused on the battle that was coming. "You did well today," Elias said. "The people are starting to believe in you." Sira smiled, but there was doubt in her eyes. "What if they're wrong? What if I'm just leading them to disaster?" Elias shook his head. "You've already led them out of darkness. They see hope in you, and that's more than most people have ever had." Sira turned to look at him. His words were simple, but they gave her strength. He believed in her, and for the first time, she started to believe in herself too. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a fighter, a leader of a rebellion. And no matter what happened, she couldn't turn back now. The next morning, they were ready. The villagers had gathered their weapons, simple tools, and farm equipment, turned into makeshift weapons for the fight ahead. The rebels were more experienced, but the villagers had something that the rebels didn't: the fire of a people who had been oppressed for far too long. Lyra gathered the group together before they left the village. "This is just the beginning," she said. "We'll need to strike fast and hard. If we're lucky, we can take the outer forts and create a base of operations. But we can't hesitate." Sarah stood beside her, feeling the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. She was no longer just a symbol. She was the heart of this fight, the reason the villagers had rallied to the cause. And the thought of what they were fighting for, freedom, pushed her forward. The battle that followed was brutal. The city's forces were well-trained and heavily armed, but they had underestimated the determination of the rebels and the villagers. Sarah fought alongside Elias, using the skills she had learned in the palace to defend herself. She had never been a warrior, but the fear that once held her back was gone. The chains of her past no longer controlled her actions. As they fought, the rebels slowly pushed the enemy back. It wasn't easy, but each step forward felt like a victory. Sarah could hear the cheers of the villagers as they overcame the soldiers, pushing them out of the village and towards the outskirts of the city. It was a hard-fought victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. After the battle was won, the villagers came together to celebrate. There were no grand speeches, no ceremonies, just people who had stood together, fought together, and won together. They had taken the first step toward freedom, and Sarah knew it was only the beginning. There would be more battles to fight, more sacrifices to make, but they were no longer afraid. Elias stood beside Sarah, watching the celebration unfold. "You did it," he said softly. Sarah smiled, looking out over the people who had joined the rebellion. "We did it, together." As the sun set on the horizon, Sarah knew one thing for certain: she wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a leader, and she would continue to fight for the freedom of her people, no matter what came next. The days following the battle had been both exhausting and exhilarating. The villagers, now fully committed to the rebellion, worked tirelessly alongside the rebels to fortify their position. They had successfully taken the outer villages, but the city of Zalar was still a stronghold, and the real fight was just beginning. Sarah stood at the edge of the camp, staring out over the fields. The horizon stretched out before her, empty and vast. For the first time, she felt a sense of peace, something she had never experienced in her old life. The chains that had once bound her, both literal and metaphorical, had been broken, and though the battle was far from over, there was a sense of freedom in the air, a sense of hope. Elias came up behind her, his footsteps light in the grass. He had been with her every step of the way, and in the quiet moments like this, she found herself grateful for his presence. He had shown her the meaning of true strength. Not the strength of a ruler, not the strength of a symbol, but the strength of someone willing to fight for what was right. "You're quiet today," Elias said, his voice gentle. "What's on your mind?" Sarah turned to look at him, a small smile on her lips. "I'm thinking about how far we've come," she said. "I never imagined that I would be here, leading a rebellion. It feels strange." Elias nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "You've come a long way, from the sacrificial pillar to this, leading people to freedom. I think you're more ready than you realize." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her at his words. She had never thought of herself as a leader. She had never wanted to be more than just a daughter of the royal family. But now, with each passing day, she could feel herself growing into the role. The people believed in her. They saw her not as a princess, but as a symbol of hope, a living proof that change was possible. "I'm not sure I'm ready," Sarah admitted, her voice quiet. "I've never had to make decisions like this. I've never been in charge of something this important." Elias smiled, a reassuring smile that made her feel a little less uncertain. "None of us are ever truly ready. We just have to do what we believe is right. And from what I've seen, you're doing exactly that." Sarah took a deep breath. the weight of his words settling in her chest. She had no choice but to keep moving forward. She could no longer run from her destiny. The people were counting on her, and if she could give them the hope they needed, then she would do whatever it took. That evening, as the rebels and villagers gathered around the campfire, Sira stood in front of them, her heart pounding. This was it. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the moment when she would speak to them. Not as a princess, but as a leader. She cleared her throat, and the camp fell silent. All eyes were on her. "Thank you," Sira began, her voice strong and clear. "Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for standing with me, for standing with all of us. I know it's been hard. I know it's been dangerous. But we've taken the first step towards something greater. We've shown the rulers of Zaylor that they can no longer control us. They can no longer decide our fate." The crowd listened intently, their faces filled with a mix of hope and determination. "But this is just the beginning," Sira continued. "We have to keep fighting. We have to show the city that we won't back down. We have to fight for the freedom of everyone in Zaylor, the farmers, the workers, the families who have lived under the threat of sacrifice for too long. We fight for them. We fight for a future where no one has to live in fear." The fire crackled behind her, the flames casting flickering shadows across her face. She could see the fire in the eyes of the people in front of her, the same fire that burned inside her. "This isn't just about us," Sira said. "This is about all the people who have been silenced, who have been told their lives don't matter. This is about creating a world where every voice is heard, where no one has to die for a tradition they don't believe in." The rebels and villagers erupted in applause. The sound filled the night air. Echoing across the camp, Sira could feel the power of their unity. They were no longer just a group of rebels and villagers, they were a force to be reckoned with. Elias stepped up beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You did it," he said, his voice proud. "You gave them something to believe in." Sira smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. She hadn't done this alone. She had Elias, Lyra, the rebels, and the villagers all standing beside her. Together, they were unstoppable. The next day, they began preparing for the next phase of their plan. They would march on the city, strike at the heart of the ruler's power. It wasn't going to be easy. The city's forces were strong, and the rebels were still outnumbered. But with every step they took, Sira could feel the weight of her past lifting. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been oppressed, for everyone who had been forced to live in fear. The days turned into weeks as the rebellion grew stronger. More villages joined the cause. More people came forward, willing to stand up for their freedom. Sira could feel the momentum building, and she knew they were getting closer to their goal. But even as the rebellion gained strength, Sira knew the hardest battles were still to come. The city would fight back with everything it had. The rulers wouldn't just let them walk in and take control. But Sira was no longer afraid. She had learned that fear was something that could be overcome, that strength came from within. And with Elias by her side, she knew they would succeed. As the sun set one evening, casting a golden glow over the camp, Sira stood at the edge once more, looking out at the horizon. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, she felt ready to face whatever it held. They were no longer just fighting for freedom. They were fighting for a new world,